to share.
I think I ask you that every time.
Okay.
And this time I didn't know there was a default. Uh, my Zoom had defaulted to not recording the shared screens at the same time, and I have remedied that problem.
Good. Yeah, Zoom does some quirky things sometimes. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Tersini, and I work with Susie Cook at Olympic College and a few others in here. I saw Tammy and Kristen, I believe. So, um, welcome. I chose two articles for this week and that I thought were interesting. And the first one I want to talk about, it's from a nonprofit healthcare organization, and I don't know if they go by JHPIEGO or JHPIEGO, but it's actually an arm of Johns Hopkins University. So, and they do a lot of education in that regard. So this article is about a type of learning that they've implemented called low dose high frequency, which is referred to as LDHF learning. So if you ever see LDHF, it means low dose high frequency. And in a nutshell, the difference is it was developed towards clinical folks at like hospital settings and things like that, wherein that the traditional teaching method for like doctors, nurse practitioners, and nurses would be classroom setting learning. And then they may do some simulation on the side, but it mostly revolved around very long, like 1 to 2 weeks of classroom learning for different things. And some of the examples they used was caring for someone with HIV or other infectious diseases or obstetric care. And with low dose, high frequency, it kind of turns that on its head. So instead of very long training sessions sitting in a classroom, it's done in, just like it says, in short spurts. So they do a lot more hands-on. And rather than coming in for 2 weeks of learning, they'll come in for a short hands-on learning period in the sim lab. And it's always in their workplace. So they try to mimic the environment as much as possible. But it's not a 2 week thing. It may only be a 6 hour thing. And then they go back to work. And then rather than wait 6 months to come back in for 2 more weeks of training, they do this more frequently. So it's very short training sessions compared to the traditional method, but they do it more often. And I'll just scroll slowly. I'm not gonna. You don't have time to read the whole thing. But what they found is that by doing this, it helps increase clinical judgment, which is something in nursing that's like the catchphrase. I remember when I started teaching back in 2011, it was always critical thinking that we focused on. And now it's clinical judgment because of the next gen NCLEX and all that. So I thought this was interesting because they actually have shown that this does increase confidence in these stakeholders. It increases competence as well as clinical judgment. So I thought this would be, I don't know if this could be adapted to a school of nursing setting, just because we're limited on space and time and things like that. But yeah, I thought it was a great approach. And these are the principles in bold there. And yeah, what do you guys think? Oh, God. Nicola.
Hi, good morning.
Good
I actually
morning.
thought the article was interesting. And I could see it. I know sim is always hard to do, but I could see this being like for a course. We have a foundations course where they're coming into the lab like once a week for an entire quarter. And I could see like where this model might be applied there, giving like context with this case-based component, the checkoffs that we often see in these courses for skills validation. When I looked at this article, this is what came to mind in an academic setting. And I thought, wow, this is definitely a great, powerful support for like, we're all about the clinical judgment. So, like, this actually says you should see that being developed early and then can carry through. I just thought it'd be a great way to like embed it into an entire curriculum if you did it like a course, like foundations.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, especially because in foundations, they're learning those technical skills that they're going to need to carry with them throughout the program. So maybe revisiting those technical skills in intervals would kind of reinforce that learning. Yeah, I agree. Thank you. I think Andrea was next, and then Shelley.
Thank you so much for this, Chris. I concur that it does work. I've been doing this in lab classes. I didn't know I was doing this in lab classes, but I was doing this in lab classes. I do case-based learning and it's competency focused, just like they talk about. And then what I was going to add is this is reminding me of micro learning or in time learning where you're maybe taking a skill you already have, but like bringing it back up. So maybe it's something we can do in nursing school. Maybe it's we bring back a first quarter or second quarter skill to the fifth quarter and like remind them how it goes. But this was incredible. These are good choices. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. How often have we seen like we'll be teaching a third quarter student and we're like, did they not learn these skills in first quarter? Or how did they forget everything? And this might help remedy that. So thank you. Shelley.
Yeah, the article was really great, and I agree with what everybody is saying. And I was thinking too, could it be, we haven't done a lot of simulation in our didactic theory classes, and how could, especially some of our our theory classes are 4 hours long, and they're definitely more interactive than they were 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but bringing sim more into it, I think this article reminded me, and they put a 10 that said 15 minutes or less, like it could be really short, but could you
Yep.
do that like in the middle of your class and at the end of your class, or how could you easily incorporate this where it's not everybody has to go down to the simulation. I was just trying to think of our layout. Our classrooms are a little bit farther away from our sim labs on some of our campuses, and so how could you incorporate it easily where it wasn't a huge undertaking for faculty? So I was just trying to picture it, but I thought it was really interesting, and I like the idea that it could be short but really impactful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, Shelley. It would probably you probably have to consider what you're teaching. So for example, I teach mental health nursing, so I don't really need a lab necessarily, but just having us practice like therapeutic conversations like every class might make them feel better.
Yeah.
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 But you're right, like things like starting an IV or something like that, that you would need a lab for that. So that would be more difficult to bring into the classroom.
Right.
But yeah, you bring up a good point. Was Susie next? Andrea, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm off mute. Wow, that's an echo. Let me
Sorry.
leave here.
Yeah.
There, sorry. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, when I started doing this, I didn't know to call it sim, but I have been rolling the gurney to the classroom since day one for didactic. But I didn't know it was sim yet.
That's
And
awesome.
then my dream classroom is like circular with basically a bedroom at the bottom, like, or a hospital room at the bottom that's open. It'd be like almost like a Shakespeare stage, only it's sim.
Yeah. No, that's
And
that's a great idea.
I could bring the students down during the lecture and alternate students out to do whatever it is, maybe walk through an electrolyte check and replacement, maybe walk through those things, but it's in the classroom, and then we talk about the theory on the screen with the sim instead of just doing the sim.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's an excellent
I'll be
idea,
quiet now.
especially if you're planning on, like, for
I
example,
can't hear you now. Hold on.
you can't. Hello? Can everybody
I
else
have
hear
a
me?
speaker
Okay.
problem on this
Okay.
device. There you are.
Okay, so I was just going to say that's an excellent idea, especially like, for example, at OC, we're expanding the nursing program. So maybe if they give us some new spaces, we could actually talk to them about that. Like maybe we could have a classroom, a lecture room that does have a hospital bed in it, or like a little part of the room. But yeah, that's a really good idea. I like that. Awesome. I think Susie was next and then Tammy.
Thanks. It took me a long time to remember how to raise my hand. So, this is like the premise of RQI that they use in the hospital for CPR, right? And and it's demonstrated to be incredibly effective. They've done some long studies for that. But then I was thinking about like, what do we do in simulation? What is it that we do that we want to reinforce in high frequency, right? In terms of patient safety, the things that, and think about the things that we always put in scenarios to make sure. For that, one of the things that we've learned is to put medication administration in every single quarter, where you wouldn't necessarily see it in like mental health, but we do it to make sure that they stay current on those specific skills. But I think there's a lot of things that we maybe not intentionally do, but should think more about why we're doing those high frequency things.
Absolutely. And also when we look at accreditation or, getting certified in simulation, nursing simulation, this might be something that you could actually brag about in your application or your self-study or whatever, that, hey, we've brought these methods right into our teaching in every quarter to reinforce that learning. So that's awesome. Tammy.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time with this, figuring it out too.
It's early.
It is early. Anyway, I wanted to say to Andrea Bradley, I bring in a baby bed. I do the OB class, or reproductive health. So I do a head to toe assessment on my baby. I also bring in things like, they'll look at me like they've never done reflex checks. And so I'll bring in reflex hammers and I make them check each other's reflexes when we're going through high risk pregnancy, preeclampsia and things like that. So anyway, but I've also found that COVID was so wonderful with getting people to do simulations and to record them, and to so I found a lot of different simulations from different colleges that I will show the obstetric emergency simulations, and then have the students rate them and talk about what they may have done differently and what went well. And we talk about that. And boy, that has led to a lot of really good conversation, because I make them prepare for classes. I do the flipped classroom. I make them watch lectures beforehand, so they should be ready to come to class to discuss that stuff. So I feel like we do a lot of simulation in class, and I didn't realize that that's what we were doing. And on the flip side, I know that some of the my other parts that do the clinical portion of the OB like to lecture during sim, and I know they wish they had more time to lecture, but that's not what our simulation is about. Our simulation is them actually putting together what they've learned in theory. So it would be nice to integrate somehow. I think, have some kind of fluid integration there.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. I actually do something similar. I found a video, and I think that was put out by Johns Hopkins, on doing a takedown with a psychotic client, even though our students will never do a takedown while they're at clinical, but just to know what it looks like so they can get out of the way, go hide, or lock yourself in the nursing office, because we don't want them doing the takedown. But and it's short. It's like 10 minutes, and students are like, wow. So I think because we have so many visual learners, anytime you can bring something visual into the classroom, and then on top of that, if it's tactile as well, like the baby, that's fantastic. That's awesome. Let's see, any other comments, questions? Nicola.
This is probably, oh, sorry. I was just going to say, this is probably a little off topic, but I just texted my daughter-in-law who works at Johns Hopkins to see if she has an access to any of their database research. Yeah, so.
That's awesome.
So I just want to interject so that the people who are watching the recording can be aware of what's going on in the chat. So we have people here from Olympic College, Edmonds College, Seattle Colleges, Green River, Lake Washington Tech, UW. I think that's covers it. But people are talking about using sim mid-fidelity in a case study, using vSim also, and case studies with things like IV pumps, a pre-op checklist, and calling out CanSim as an amazing resource. It's CAN-SIM. They are amazing. Using YouTube videos. And oh yeah, the whole takedown thing can happen in any setting, not just mental health.
That's true. That is true. Yes. Nicola.
Yeah, so I guess I just had a question. When we're using sim in like other locations, so I love this idea of bringing it into the classroom and whatnot. How are you ensuring that your faculty are like following those best practices of the pre-brief and preparation? So if we're going to call it sim, do our faculty actually follow those best practices with a pre-brief? Are they facilitating it in the way we truly like an Axel outlines facilitation? And are we formally debriefing these activities? I just think about like if we're doing just a 10-minute like episode, like we've still got to tack on the time for the pre-brief to set that safe container. And then we've also got to make sure there's that time for debrief. How are y'all kind of adding that into a really tight didactic period of time too? Oh, Susie's got the answer. All right.
I don't have the answer, unfortunately, but I have had the discussion many, many times. And I've I had a faculty member, and I still can't figure out how to put my hand up, but I had a faculty member who was doing a high stakes final exam in the sim lab and calling it simulation. And I had to like it took a lot of effort and convincing to say, you can't call it simulation because all of our simulation is formative in our program. And, you know, the students were crying and like crashing emotionally. And it's like, you can't call it sim because now they think this is what sim's like when we go in to replace clinical hours. And it's not ever like that. So it takes a lot of conversation and like even providing the language saying you can use the equipment, but you cannot use this verbiage to describe it. But I think Drea and I have had some conversations, and Drea's got her Chessie, so she knows what she's doing, but I don't know, you probably have something to say about that.
Oh, I was just going to say one thing I do when it's a didactic class is we do have that discussion ahead of time. I, like Tammy, do a flipped classroom. So the students are supposed to show up prepared and they know what the topics are going to be. But we do classroom rules. And one of those rules is we we assume the best of each other. This is a safe place to make mistakes. We have that discussion at the beginning and then throughout the quarter. So it's never, I think we could definitely do better with that, Nicole. And maybe it's not a 20-minute debrief, which is like more of the best practice for that 10 minutes. But maybe it's more collectively a few minutes afterwards. I agree. Just having the hands-on maybe is not truly sim, but bringing clinical to classroom, I think, is where we're all kind of focusing towards.
Yeah, because I just know, like, you know, once you've got faculty who are saying, I'm simming in the classroom, that can potentially be a challenge for accreditation purposes, where essentially the language of accreditation is any simulation that's occurring is kind of owned and overseen and kind of, I don't want to use the word regulated, but like coached and supported by the simulation center. And so like as someone in a simulation center, when I hear someone saying I'm simming in the classroom, I get anxious because I was like, are you though? Like, are you simming in the classroom? Because if somebody audits that classroom and we're calling it simulation, it comes back on me in terms of faculty development. Like, does our faculty truly sim in the classroom?
Yeah, that's a good point. Absolutely, because we all have different comfort levels when it comes to simulation, and you know how important. I mean, pre-briefing and debriefing are just as important as the activity itself. So yeah, you bring up very good points. Andrea Brady.
Yes. So that brings up our curriculum. And are we adding, basically what we're circling around is, should we be adding clinical hours if we're doing the sim that way to our didactic courses? Like if we did take it all the way, otherwise, is it just a case study with props? And we're not calling it sim because we're not maximizing our opportunities with the very limited clinical placements we have, if we are using that sim and we are doing it, your point was spot on, Nicola. If I can use your first name, I feel like I should be saying using your title and your last name. I still have imposter syndrome, but that's spot on. I think we should be kind of championing how we align it, and then going through and making, if we are truly doing sim, making those curriculum revisions and listing the class as such with the clinical hours that they have within the state's regulations, because we do have much better definition than we've ever had, but I do feel like it took the opportunities, or we can't maximize that in the classroom anymore with the sim rules and still call it sim. So I think we have the opportunity to say that and advocate for what would be best for the students.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, the other important thing, if you're going to bring something into the classroom, I really think it needs to be faculty driven, in that we're all on the same page. We've all been briefed on what the outcomes are, and the objectives and expectations, because yeah, we can't have people who have never really done sim running it. If we're going to call it simulation, they need to have the training and everything else. So yeah, they're all good points. I mean, I think it's definitely something we should look at. Susie.
I also worry about the equipment because I have, we have lab resource nurses here who are trained on to operate the equipment, and sometimes we'll have faculty who are like, oh, it's no big deal. And I'm like, yeah, it really is a big deal. Like, you can really mess this thing up. You're like, oh no, just tell me how to turn it on. And I'm like, yeah, but so from my standpoint as a simulation manager, it's like, that's always kind of on the edge too.
Yeah.
And then sometimes people go, oh, I'm just going to take it out of the lab. I'm like, no, these things are scheduled, throughout the whole quarter on different days and different spots. You can't just take a piece of equipment.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you got to think about, if you're going to bring equipment into a classroom, you still have to be accountable. It's expensive. This equipment is expensive. We can't just leave it in a classroom, especially if it's being used by a different division, like English is using it next or something, which happens sometimes. We can't just have our mannequins sitting around for anyone to mess with. So yeah, there's a lot to think about before you implement this, for sure. Okay, well, I'm going to segue into the other article, which was a meta-analysis. And the reason why I chose this is because, as I kind of said earlier, we know debriefing is important, but is there one specific type of debriefing that's better than other types? And so this meta-analysis, using a systematic review, actually went through different evidence, and they looked at instructor-led debriefing and peer-led debriefing, as well as video-assisted debriefing. And having said all that, they looked at all of it and they came out with, we know that debriefing is important, and that's what this shows, is that debriefing is an important piece of the simulation experience. However, the evidence wasn't there to dictate that one type of debriefing was better than another. So then my question is, should we maybe integrate multiple diverse ways of debriefing? Should we be doing maybe instructor-led for a couple debriefings, and once the students have seen it, let them peer lead the debriefing, and then of course we can interject as needed? I don't know, it's just something I'm thinking about, to kind of just give them even more ways of receiving feedback. So what do you guys think about that? Is there any type of debriefing that you prefer? Yes. Okay. Drea.
I think we were almost even on that, but
I
yeah.
know. I'm just going in order.
I think the kind that the faculty are able, or the sim helper are able to do, is the best one. I think whatever is like the simplest, most straightforward. I think if it doesn't make sense to people, they won't use it. I love that it doesn't matter what you do as long as you do it. And that's a great idea to kind of go forward with. It's kind of what I try to do in general is like progression, not perfection, right? Just like how can we progress this forward? So maybe, you know, somebody makes sense to use gas and somebody else to use pearls, but making sure that we're all on the same, we don't want the students to be confused either. So
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Nicola.
So we've adopted pearls, but it's interesting at the beginning of the program, it's instructor led. So like we truly are like pulling these like asking these questions and whatnot. Then as the program progresses, there's less of us asking and the learners just automatically start debriefing because we standardize how we do it. Then we've just started doing something with our like our last quarter DNPs who are kind of in their capstones, our advanced practice nurses, where they do a self debrief activity where it's actually the pearls outline and questions that are kind of tied to the objectives, and their responsibility is to kind of watch their video, complete that activity after, submit it, and then there's like a discussion about it. So I don't know how well that's going to work, but we felt like by the time you're at year 3 and you've been simming since you've like entered the program, the ability to kind of reflect independently, we're trying to see what that looks like in terms of valuable debriefing information. So I think it's just like Dre was saying, like you've got to kind of be consistent. It's got to be something that works, and it's got to be something that's easy to do and kind of, again, this whole scaffolding, even the debriefing, the way we scaffold the facilitation, learning, and support.
That's interesting. I think we'll all be interested to hear how it goes with the self debriefing. I like that idea.
It'll either go really well or it'll go like nowhere and we won't be doing it again.
Right, right. But that's the thing is we have to try different things because, you know, everybody has a different learning style, and we know that debriefing is important. And I think that teaching somebody else how to do something is the best way to learn something. So I have my students, like I'll teach them one person something and I'll watch them teach the next student the same thing because I think it reinforces it. So I think you're onto something. I think that'll hopefully be successful.
It's also super lazy, so the students know how to debrief better than the faculty do by the time they get to the end of the program. So I'm like, I'm just gonna let the faculty, the students do what they do, rather than say, let me orient another new faculty to this debriefing process for learners that are well skilled in debriefing at this point.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Jennifer.
It's interesting. I actually attended a debriefing workshop at IMSH, which was about this very thing. And the discussion revolved around the fact that actually you should mix up your debriefing methods depending on what you saw happening. So there's sometimes where there's just such a huge obvious gap in knowledge, right? That what you traditionally use may not work. And that you need to be able to flip, back and forth. But as everyone's pointed out, that's not going to really work if you're kind of a new to facilitation and debriefing. You've just learned how to do this one thing, and that's probably what you're going to stick with. I think there's also some room to look at, is that partly why some of us feel so uncomfortable with the debriefing process, and maybe simulation never really clicks for some of our faculty, is because they've had some of those experiences. It was an interesting webinar. I learned some tricks even with Plus Delta that I hadn't done before. So yeah, I think I wasn't surprised to see this after going to that workshop because I think it really is situation dependent.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think and you bring up a good point too. I think debriefing, especially for a novice educator, does take time for that educator to feel comfortable doing it and take some practice. So if we're expecting them to get better at it, but then we're taking that away and making it peer-led or, self-reflection or something like that, then they're not getting that practice. So I think we definitely need faculty that are comfortable in debriefing, even if they're leading the peer debriefing, they still need to be involved with that. So that brings up a good point. Also, I wanted to say, I think it was Nicola that said these students know by the third quarter or fourth, whatever. It's so true. When I do my my clinical or my simulations, we always do the 5-finger contract in the beginning. And by like the third quarter, the students can lead it themselves. I'll say, what is this finger for? You know, they talk through it because they've seen it before. So maybe they would be good to lead peer-led debriefings in the later quarters when they're, getting ready to graduate or something. Susie.
Thanks. Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed, well, we started when I started, so there's the hand. I don't know how that went up there. We started doing simulation, and our goal is to train all the clinical instructors to be able to facilitate their own simulations for their clinical hours. And so that's why I chose GAS to, because it was like simple. It was like, here, there's 3 steps. You can, learn these 3 steps and practice that. But then when I started looking at maybe we should be doing something else, they all kind of boiled down to those 3 steps of gather, analyze, and summarize in their own different patterns and ways, right? So we made the decision to stick with that. But what I've found is over the course of, say, the ADN program, which is 6 quarters, by the time we get to the last quarter and we're doing the capstone, the students expect the format, right? They're like, no, we're not done doing that. We have to finish gathering, and then we have to do the analyzing part. But then what's happened is the translation to practice. I'm like, you're going to be doing simulation the rest of your career, and there will be moments, say a code, but then you're not on the code team, but you're the BLS team, and the code team figures out a way, or they have structure to debrief the event, but the nurses on the floor may not. And so I'm like, you guys have the skills to debrief. And they're like, well, yeah, we know how to debrief an event because we're so used to it all the time. So what I think is cool is that they think they're able to take that skill into practice and help take care of themselves to do debriefing, which I think is serving them well. The other thing I think is interesting about this article is that it was published in 2020, and the last article that they looked at was in 2016. The Anaxel standards for debriefing came out in 2016, right? And then the new ones didn't come out until 2021. The debriefing standard, the criteria of the debriefing standard didn't change much from 2016 to 2021, but the description of debriefing did change dramatically between those 2 standards. So articles like this probably informed those changes to go, okay, we need to be much more clear about what debriefing is and can look like.
Yeah. And I wonder too, when they talk about video assisted debriefing, which I had not been familiar with, I wonder if that came about simply because of COVID and the fact that we all were basically in a bubble and we couldn't be on campus and things like that. Because I don't, and the way we do our simulation at OC, I don't see how we could do video assisted debriefing unless they mean like interjecting during the actual scenario. I'm not sure.
No, I think one way you could see that is if you were in the debriefing room after the scenario and you're replaying snippets of the scenario to go, oh, watch this.
Gotcha.
Now let's talk about this event. How did that
Okay.
happen? How did that
Yeah.
feel? And I've seen instructors do that real effectively. The barrier is sometimes students will not watch themselves on video,
Right.
especially in public.
Right. Yeah. And you just, you have to do it in that would be a good way if you're saying, hey, look at how great you did in this scenario. Because I think at my former employer in Florida, at a college in Florida, we only showed them video if they did something wrong. Like if we would pull videos if we thought, oh, they might get kicked out of the program because they did this and look at what happened. And so, but again, we used it as a summative, it was high stakes. You passed your final sim or you failed out of the program. And see, our whole mentality on simulation here at OC is very different. It's really there to support students in their learning, not penalize them.
Well, in our capstone, we the students discover a patient unresponsive and are told how to prepare for a code and start a code. And then the second scenario, they actually do it themselves. And so I found it a positive experience for them to watch themselves in action, to build their confidence and say, look, you did this, look, you did this, look, you now you know how to do this. But I had one group who giggled the whole way through and made the decision to not reinforce that behavior. And they didn't show them their video, right? Because I didn't want to reinforce that behavior.
Yeah. It's interesting. Really quick, for those of us, because we all probably use different methods. I'm not sure if it was in here or not, but I was going to have Nicola, just for those that may not know, briefly explain Pearl as compared to some of the other methods that might be out there.
Yeah, sure. So we love Pearls because it allows us to then stretch to IPE, but it also allows, as we're mentoring other other schools that are using our Sim Center. We're very fortunate in that we have like medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, all like in the same location. So as we're branching out to try and build like interprofessional opportunities in Sim, we wanted to have something that is kind of healthcare specific, not nursing specific. So it really does allow you to have that opportunity to like debrief feelings, to summarize the case. Advocacy inquiry is a part of it. If you've never looked at it, the little flashcards that you can get actually provide your faculty like cues and questions to ask, and also talks about what facilitator-led versus learner-led would look like. But it really also like just builds in pretty much a lot of what we see in like the GAS model, to just allow learners to kind of think about like, you know, why they're doing what they're doing. We script it in every one of our scenarios so that if we do that same scenario 10 times, there are prompts that are there for like our facilitators to kind of help to debrief things that consistently we see. But it also, that model is just a great framework for being able to like talk a little bit about, you know, when we do it for self-debriefing, questions tied to the objectives. So like, you know, just the critical thinking questions that we see, we use like across the board. I don't know if that was helpful or not, but it's really a model used for all, that can be used in all healthcare areas. And that's why we adopted it, because it just allowed us to not have to adjust what we're doing if we're simming with medicine, for example.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I know I belong to IMSH and actually 2 different simulation organizations, and they actually have different debriefing methods right on their website. I was looking through them and I saw the Pearls on there. So, all right, Susie.
Nicola, what how much training do you find that it takes for someone to be able to use it well?
So we script it, and that's why we do it. Like we script a pre-brief, and so we will do training with faculty, but then we use the NLN scenario template anytime we're doing like a simulation, and we will sim with people who are not like CHESI certified. Even though only the undergrads need it right now for clinical replacement, we do it with everybody to try and role model that. And even in skills, we actually script like you have to say the basic assumption, you have to do like, how is everybody feeling about our training and this and what we did. So we really have tried to make it show up everywhere. It's not easy, but like we embed those resources in every Canvas course for the faculty to refer to, and then we kind of stand there and do it with them. The Pearls is actually not too bad, because if you're actually scripting like the language, because Pearls actually has a script to it, it makes it a little bit more consistent, and it just seems to flow a lot easier than asking the faculty to think about how they're going to phrase questions about, I saw, I'm wondering, I'm curious, those types of things. Sometimes on the spot, faculty really struggle to make it sound like it's coming from a place of curiosity, rather than what were you thinking? Sounds a little bit different. Like for those of us who sim, what were you thinking? We can make that sound like we were really curious about that. But I think there's like a nuance to it that some faculty are all like, what were you thinking? I noticed. And I'm like, no, not like that. But yeah, so for us, we just kind of try to add the questions like, I'm curious, when you saw this, I'm curious about your thoughts, or tell me more about. So we kind of use that language for people who are not there. For us, because we are really, I mean, we just kind of post-COVID had a rebuilding of things in our Sim Center. I don't know if the rest of you did. It's like nobody who was here pre-COVID is still here. And it took us a while we looked at it like the phoenix rising from the ashes, like let's start over and see where we move from here. So it's been a slow process and we're still at the beginning of it. Many of you could probably teach me a whole lot in like, how do we get people on board with this? But right now we kind of own the process with the faculty. And our hope is that like when we see our early adopters, we will be less owning this process.
That's awesome. That's great. Also the systematic review that I sent out, there's a lot of good articles, individual articles listed in there too, if you want to kind of see which ones they looked at. And as Susie said, there's newer information since 2020. So there's definitely other articles out there. All right, I think we had a great discussion. I'm going to turn it back over to Susie because I know that our time is just about up. And thank you guys for participating.
Yeah, I want to really thank you for everything everyone's added today, and for Chris. Thank you, Chris, for presenting your articles. And now it goes to who wants to do it next time. And everybody's going to jump at once. It wasn't hard. And actually, these were not the original articles that you picked out, Chris. I went home and read them. I'm like, wait, this is what he told me he was going to do it on. All right, no one's going to volunteer. Well, let me know if you do, and if you're watching the recording, let me know. And if I didn't get you, if I don't get you your certificate of attendance after you fill out this survey, I'm going to share it right now. Then reach out and let me know. Oh, how do I do this? Andrea, you turned your microphone on. Do you want to say something?
Oh, nobody was jumping up there, but I'm limited on time, but I would volunteer to do the next one, not the very next.
Okay, great.
Give me a 60-day notice instead of a 30.
All right.
Yeah.
And the only thing I ask is that you send me the articles so that
Yeah.
people can download them with, like, at least a week before.
I was hoping to have a buddy to make sure they were good ones to choose.
Ah,
Due
they're
to
always
the
good ones.
imposter syndrome.
I'll be
They're
your
always good
buddy.
ones.
I'm happy to be your buddy if you need a buddy. Like I'm down for that if you need a buddy to look at them too and kind of do it with you.
Yeah.
You got it.
The
So
place I
that's
want to embarrass myself.
for March, right?
Yeah, I'll do March.
Cool. Let me show you the how do I do this? This one? That one? Yes. So there's a QR code for you to scan. I guess I could in the future put it in the chat too with the link. That might be easier.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to do that. I'm on my phone in my car, so I don't know how to scan that.
Yeah, I did
Yeah.
the same thing, and I took a screenshot of it, but I never, like, I would have had to print it out and then scan it with my phone, and I just never went back and did it.
Yeah, I can't.
Okay, well, you
I'm too
hold on,
technically challenged.
you hold on a second. I will get you the link and put it. Well, can you do the link on your phone?
The
think
QR
so.
code will work great for video watchers, though.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will get the link right now and put it in the chat. There you go. Thanks for coming, Jennifer. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you so much for